ดูเอว
the storm that changed everything. The sky had been quiet all morning. The leaves didn't rustle. The chickens pecked lazily at the ground, and the golden puppies curled up under the front porch, sleeping soundly. Jack had just finished checking the water system on the edge of the field when the first drop of rain hit his forehead. He looked up. Darkness was swallowing the sky. Within minutes, the stillness shattered. The wind screamed through the trees like a warning too late to heed. Rain began to pour in heavy sheets. Tu Tien rushed out from the kitchen, her apron soaked in seconds, eyes wide with worry. Jack, the clouds, they're moving too fast, she cried. He nodded grimly. This isn't just rain. In less than 20 minutes, the small creek near their farm became a raging torrent. Jack shouted over the roar, "Get the animals, I'll check the puppies." Tu Tien ran inside, scooping up 2 trembling kittens. The mother dog barked frantically, trying to gather her pups. Jack dashed to the porch, but the water was already climbing the steps. The ground shook slightly, a low rumble from the mountain above. Flash flood to Tien up the hill now. Jack yelled, "I'm not leaving the animals." She cried, tears mixing with the rain. "You have to," he shouted, "go." She hesitated for only a second, then clutched the kittens to her chest and ran barefoot toward the back hill, slipping on the mud, climbing through thorns and broken branches as the water surged behind her. Jack turned, heart pounding, searching for the puppies, but they were gone. Only an empty blanket remained, where they had been moments before. He could barely see now. Rain blurred his vision. Trees cracked in the distance. The shack next to the rice field groaned and tilted under the force of water. "Tu Tien," he screamed. "I'm here." Her voice, faint and broken, echoed from above. Jack turned and saw her on the opposite hill, waving frantically, hair drenched, hugging the kittens like lifelines. But a river now split them in two. The water, dark and roaring, tore through their land like a beast unleashed. Jack stumbled backward, trying to hold on to something, anything but. The current had taken most of the farm already. He shouted again, but the wind stole his voice. On the hill, Tu Tien was screaming something he couldn't hear, pointing at something behind him. Jack turned. The chicken coop had broken loose and was floating toward him. With one last leap, he scrambled up the bank, mud clinging to his clothes, just as the structure smashed into where he'd stood seconds ago across the stream. Tu Tien sobbed, hands covering her mouth. "Stay there," Jack shouted, his voice cracking. "Don't move." "I'm on the hill," she shouted back. "I couldn't call you. My phone, I lost it. It's okay. I see you." Jack held up his flashlight, flicking it on and off. "I'm here." They stood like that for a moment. Two souls divided by a flood, gazing at each other through the rain, their faces pale, their hands trembling. Then Jack whispered, barely audible over the storm, "Don't be afraid, Tu Tien. We'll survive this." The morning after loss and despair. By dawn, the storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was more haunting than the chaos itself. Mist clung to the ruined fields like a shroud, veiling the devastation with an eerie stillness. Tu Tien descended the hill slowly, barefoot and exhausted, the kittens still cradled in her arms, their tiny bodies trembling. What used to be their beloved farm was now unrecognizable. The vegetable beds had vanished beneath layers of thick, wet mud. The bamboo fence Jack had built last summer lay broken and tangled like driftwood. The coop was nothing but splinters. Furniture floated here and there, some lodged in trees, others swept into corners of the yard. "Jack," she called out softly. A beam of light flickered from behind a collapsed shed. He emerged, soaked to the bone, carrying a wooden crate filled with whatever supplies he could salvage. Half a torn blanket, a rusted pot, a bundle of wilted herbs. He dropped everything when he saw her. "Tu Tien." He breathed, rushing to her. "Are you okay?" She nodded slowly. "The kittens made it. I couldn't get the puppies." Her voice cracked. Jack reached out and gently pulled her into his arms. She didn't cry, not right away. Her body shook, but her eyes stared blankly at the scene before them. Then behind them, a soft whimper. They turned. The mother dog stood near the broken kennel. drenched and muddy, sniffing the ground, circling in small, frantic patterns. "She's looking for them," Tu Tien whispered. Jack swallowed hard. "They're gone." No, her voice was barely a breath. "No, they must have. Maybe they ran off somewhere." She walked toward the mother dog, calling softly, "Vang Vang, come here, girl." But the dog ignored her voice. Pacing and crying, Tu Tien knelt beside her, tears finally falling. "I'm so sorry. I should have brought them to." Jack crouched beside her. "There wasn't time. Don't blame yourselves, but they were just babies." She sobbed. "I told myself I'd take them out later, that the water wouldn't rise so fast." A wave of guilt crashed into her, harder than the flood ever could. She buried her face in her hands. Nearby, the faint meow of the cat brought a moment of relief. It was alive, perched atop the old chicken wall. Eyes wide and fearful, Tu Tien let out a shaky laugh and rushed to bring it food. But even that joy was fleeting. "Everything is broken," she murmured. "We lost everything." Jack looked around the wreckage. The cornfield had flattened. The shed's roof had caved in. Their tools were missing, buried or broken. "We still have each other," he said. "That's enough to start again." She looked at him, eyes red and swollen. "But what if it happens again?" He reached up and tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. "Then we'll face it again together." As they sat among the wreckage, the sound of footsteps echoed from the road above. "Jack, Tu Tien," and a familiar voice called. It was one of Jack's workers from the construction site. Behind him were several men carrying shovels, buckets, even bags of food. "We came to help clean up," the man said. "We heard what happened." Tu Tien's lips trembled. You came all this way." Jack stood up, voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you. We need all the help we can get." And as the morning light broke through the clouds, for the first time a dozen hands began to work together, pulling debris, lifting furniture, coaxing life back into a place that had nearly drowned. But no one could lift the sadness from Tu Tien's heart. Not yet, because in her ears, she still heard the cries of the mother dog, searching for her lost children. Helping hands and heavy hearts. By midday, the once desolate farm buzzed with life, not from crops or animals, but from people. Jack's co-workers from the construction site, villagers from up the road, and even two women from the neighborhood above had come down to help. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. They saw the ruin. And they saw the heartbreak written across Tu Tien's face. Jack directed the cleanup quietly, but with purpose. "We'll move all the usable wood to the west side. Stack the broken chairs here. Anything salvageable, don't throw it yet." His voice held no anger, only weary determination. Tu Tien tried to keep herself busy, brushing mud off what was once her kitchen table. Now warped and stained, a neighbor handed her a broom. "Don't worry, dear. We'll get through this one step at a time." She nodded, forcing a smile, but inside her chest ached. Every corner of the farm held memories of laughter, shared meals, whispered dreams beneath starlit skies. Now it all smelled like floodwater and loss. Suddenly Jack waved someone over. A man in uniform approached, tall, older, with a kind but worn face. "Mr. Tu," Jack greeted. "Thank you for coming." Tu Tien looked up as Jack added gently, "This is Mr. from the local government." The official nodded politely. "I came to assess the damage. We're checking on all affected families." He looked around. "The destruction here, it's worse than most places." Jack's jaw tightened. The water never came this far before, but last night it didn't stop. Tu Tien stood beside him, silent, holding the edge of her sleeve tightly. "I see you've already started cleaning up," Mr. Tu said. "Good. I'll file the report. We may be able to provide some support. Not much, but something." "Thank you," Jack said. "This farm is everything to us." Mr. Tu glanced between them. "Girlfriend?" Jack nodded. "Yes. This is Tu Tien. She owns this land. I'm helping her rebuild." The official gave a small, respectful bow. "You're lucky to have each other." After he left, Jack placed a steadying hand on Tu Tien's back. "You okay?" She gave a short laugh. "Dry and tired. Everyone keeps asking me that. I know, Jack said gently. It's okay to not be in the corner of the yard. A small crowd had gathered around a broken fence. One of the neighbors had found the remains of the dog kennel lodged in the roots of a tree. A silence fell over the group as they realized what it was. Tu Tien turned away. She didn't want to see it. Instead, she found herself by the garden. What little remained of it. A single cornstalk stood tall, somehow untouched, bent slightly but alive. She knelt by it, brushing away the dirt at its base. Her fingers trembled. Jack came and crouched beside her. You want to try replanting today? She shook her head. No. Not yet. He didn't press. He just sat with her in the mud in silence, until the sound of children's laughter broke through the heaviness. Two boys from the village chased a chicken that had somehow survived. Its feathers soaked its steps wobbly. The sight brought the faintest smile to Tu Tien's lips. Later, as they took a short break, she offered pieces of watermelon to the helpers. Thank you for being here, she said softly. One of the women smiled, taking a slice. When the flood comes, we don't ask whose farm it is. We just come, and that day, surrounded by hands worn from labor and hearts heavy with shared grief, Tu Tien realized something. They hadn't lost everything. Not yet. The sun emerged at last in the late afternoon. Shy and hesitant, casting golden light across the wreckage. It didn't dry the mud or fix the broken walls, but it brought a sliver of warmth, and for Tu Tien a moment of stillness. She stood by the chicken wall where the cat had last been seen. It was gone again. Vang. She called softly, naming the golden mother cat. There was a rustle in the rafters. A faint meow answered. Tu Tien looked up and gasped. The cat was there, perched on a beam, eyes wide, formatted and dusty. In the corner of its mouth, a dead lizard hung like a sad trophy. It had survived the storm. You clever girl, Tu Tien whispered, tears pooling again, but this time not from sorrow. You climbed up here when the water rose. She gently reached for a sack of bran and poured a handful onto a dry stone. Come down, Vang. It's safe now. Jack, standing nearby with a group of helpers, noticed the moment he walked over, quietly crouching beside Tu Tien. She made it, he said softly. Tu Tien nodded. But she's hungry and scared just like us. They stayed there in silence, watching the cat eat around them. The cleanup was slowing. The heavy lifting was done. Most of the water had drained from the fields. The workers wiped their brows and began gathering under the shade of what remained of the front awning. That's when Tu Tien's mother arrived. She brought more than food. She brought warmth to baskets. A large rice pot, small bowls of braised pork, corn, and a plate of sticky rice cakes wrapped in banana leaves. You haven't eaten since yesterday, she scolded gently, her voice both sharp and soft. And don't say you're not hungry. Tu Tien said, her throat tightening. You didn't have to. I couldn't sleep all night, her mother replied, placing a hand on her daughter's back. When Jack called this morning, I went straight to the market. Within minutes, everyone was sitting together, sharing bowls, spoons, chopsticks, whatever was left. Someone passed out pieces of watermelon again. Others used overturned buckets as makeshift stools. The air smelled of wet soil and home-cooked food. Jack sat beside Tu Tien, tearing a piece of sticky rice cake in half. He handed her the bigger half. Eat, he whispered. For the puppies, for what comes next. Tu Tien stared at the food for a moment, then took a bite, and just like that, the ache in her chest eased just a little. Laughter broke out from one corner. One of the workers had found a plastic chair floating in the rice field and tried to sit on it. It collapsed immediately, sending him into a puddle. Everyone laughed, even Tu Tien, the sound escaping her lips like something forgotten. She looked around and felt it again, that quiet, painful truth. Grief doesn't go away, but it softens when shared. A woman from the village nudged her gently. You're lucky, you know. Tu Tien raised an eyebrow. How? The woman smiled. You have him. She turned to see Jack drying his hands, sleeves rolled up, mud on his cheek, eyes already scanning for what needed fixing next. Yes, she thought. I do. As the meal ended and people prepared to leave, Tu Tien stood and bowed. Thank you all, truly. I don't know what we would have done without you. An older man waved dismissively. Today we help you, tomorrow you help someone else. That's how we survived that night. As dusk settled and the last of the visitors left, Jack and Tu Tien sat under the broken porch roof. The cat curled between them, the sound of quiet returning. They had lost their farm, but they had each other. And they had a place to begin again. Rebuilding the dream. The next morning, the air was still damp with the memory of rain, but the sky held no clouds, only the bright pale blue of a new beginning. Jack rose early. He walked the perimeter of what used to be the garden, boots squelching in the soft mud. The cornfields were gone. The irrigation pipes were twisted and broken, but the land still smelled like home, like wet soil and determination. Tu Tien joined him not long after, carrying 2 cups of tea. Her eyes were puffy, her hair tied up hastily, but her hands were steady. I barely slept, she said, handing him a cup. Me neither. Jack replied, taking a sip. But we made it. She looked around the destroyed farm, then back at him. Do you really think we can fix all this? Jack nodded, slow but certain. Not in one day, maybe not even 1 month, but we will together. They started small. With the help of a few remaining volunteers, they built a temporary shelter using salvaged bamboo and tarpaulin. Jack tied each corner with precise knots, his hands used to labor, while Tu Tien swept the dry area and set down a blanket for the animals. The cat stayed close, no longer hiding. The mother dog lay under the tarp, her head on her paws, her eyes still heavy with grief. Occasionally she would whimper and sniff the air, as if still hoping to find her lost puppies. Tu Tien sat beside her and whispered, "We'll bring joy back to this place, I promise." Later that day, Murder returned with 2 younger officials. They brought a clipboard, a camera, and a small envelope. "This is from the district," Mr. De said, handing it to Jack. "It's not much, just emergency relief funds. We've also added your name to the list for future assistance." Jack bowed respectfully. "Thank you, we'll use it well." Tu Tien hesitated, then said softly, "Will there be help for the others too?" "Yes," Mr. De nodded. "We're doing our best this flood. No one expected it after they left." Jack turned to her. "You okay?" Tu Tien shrugged. "It still hurts, but seeing everyone helping, it gives me hope." By sunset, they had cleaned out what remained of the storage room. Jack found a box of vegetable seeds, miraculously dry, hidden behind an overturned cabinet. He held it up. "Look what survived." Tu Tien smiled for the first time that day. "Then we start tomorrow." That night, they shared dinner under the temporary shelter, a simple meal of rice and steamed greens. They sat on crates, the animals nestled nearby. The sky overhead vast and clear. "I never imagined," Tu Tien whispered, "that something so terrible could bring so many people together." Jack reached for her hand. "Sometimes the land breaks so it can be rebuilt stronger." She looked at him, a question forming in her eyes. "Do you regret it, moving here? Choosing this life?" Jack didn't answer right away. He simply squeezed her hand and said, "No. I chose you. The rest we can build." As night fell, the sound of frogs returned to the fields. Somewhere the stream still flowed, quieter now, gentler. And in that quiet, Jack and Tu Tien sat side by side, looking at the stars through the open roof, their fingers intertwined, their hearts slowly stitching themselves back together. They had weathered the storm. Now came the season of rebuilding, not just a farm, but a dream that refused to drown. The water kept rising, and the night had only just begun.